Jacob Miller woke up before sunrise like he did every morning. He pulled on his worn boots, grabbed his hat, and walked out to check on his cattle. The air was cool and fresh on the frontier world of New Prairie. This was his land, his quiet life, far away from the wars and chaos he had left behind 20 years ago. He had been a soldier once, fighting in places he tried not to remember. Now he was just a farmer. He liked it that way. His ranch sat on the edge of the colony, where the grasslands stretched for miles, and the only sounds were wind and birds. No sirens, no explosions, no orders, just peace. But this morning was different. As Jacob walked toward the northern pasture, he saw something that made him stop dead in his tracks. 5 massive eggs sat in the middle of his field, each one taller than he was. They glowed softly in the pre-dawn light, pulsing with colors he had never seen before. Purple, green, gold, and blue rippled across their surfaces like oil on water. Jacob approached slowly, his hand instinctively moving to where his sidearm used to hang. He didn't carry weapons anymore, but old habits died hard. The eggs were warm to the touch, almost hot. He could feel something moving inside them, something alive and powerful. His first thought was to call the colonial authorities. His second thought was that he should probably run. But before he could do either, the first egg began to crack. The sound was like thunder, sharp and sudden. Jacob stumbled backward as pieces of shell fell away, and something red and scaled pushed its way out. It was a dragon. A real, living dragon. The creature unfurled its wings and shook itself like a wet dog. It was about the size of a large cow, with crimson scales that gleamed like polished metal. When it opened its eyes, they were golden and intelligent. The dragon looked right at Jacob and made a sound, something between a purr and a growl. Before Jacob could process what was happening, the other 4 eggs hatched in quick succession. A pale blue dragon emerged next, followed by one that was black as midnight. Then a gray one, and finally a small golden dragon that seemed to shimmer in the growing light. The 5 dragons, red one, clearly the leader, walked toward him on unsteady legs. Jacob knew he should run. He knew what dragons were. The Draconith Empire was one of the most powerful civilizations in the galaxy. Humanity had met them once, 70 years ago, and it had ended badly. People died. The Draconith made it very clear that humans were to stay away from their territory, and especially away from their young. And now, 5 dragon babies were standing in Jacob's pasture, looking at him like he was supposed to know what to do. The red dragon reached him and pressed its head against his chest. It was warm, almost burning. Jacob felt something shift in his mind, like a door opening. He could sense the dragon's emotions, hunger, confusion, and something else, recognition. The dragon knew him somehow, trusted him. The other 4 joined their sibling, surrounding Jacob in a circle of scales and wings. The little golden one, the smallest of them all, looked up at him with eyes that seemed far too wise for a newborn. Jacob felt another mental touch, softer than the first. This one carried a simple feeling: safe. Jacob Miller was many things, but he was not a coward. He had faced enemy fire, ship crashes, and creatures that would give most people nightmares. But standing in his pasture, surrounded by 5 baby dragons that could get him killed just by existing near him, he felt truly afraid for the first time in years. He also felt something else: responsibility. These creatures needed help. They were babies, newly hatched and vulnerable. Whatever had brought them here, whoever had left them, they were alone now, and they had chosen him. Jacob made a decision that would change his life forever. He would keep them hidden, at least for now, at least until he figured out what to do. He led the 5 dragons to his largest barn, the one he used for storage. It was big enough to hold them, barely. They followed him like ducklings following their mother, stumbling over their own feet and wings. Inside the barn, Jacob set about making them comfortable. He piled up old hay for bedding and brought out every blanket he owned. The dragons explored their new home, sniffing everything and making curious chirping sounds. The red one seemed to be keeping the others in line, while the black one kept trying to climb on everything. The first real problem was food. Dragons were carnivores. Jacob knew that much. He went to his freezer and pulled out all the meat he had, several weeks' worth of his own food. He tossed it to the dragons, who fell on probably were. In less than 5 minutes, they had eaten everything. Jacob did some quick math in his head. If they ate like this every day, he would run out of food in a week. If they grew as fast as he suspected they would, he would run out even faster. He was going to need help, or at least a better plan. That night, Jacob sat in his barn, watching the 5 dragons sleep. They had curled up together in a pile of scales and wings, occasionally twitching and making small sounds. The golden one had its head resting on the red one's back. The gray one snored. It was almost cute, if you forgot that they were dragons, and their parents were probably looking for them. Jacob thought about his options. He could report them to the authorities, but that would bring attention he didn't want. The Draconith would find out, and then there would be trouble. Big trouble. He could try to move them somewhere else, but where would he take 5 growing dragons? He could try to send them away, but something told him they wouldn't go. The golden dragon opened one eye and looked at him. Jacob felt that mental touch again, gentle and warm. He understood then what had happened. These dragons had bonded with him somehow. He was their guardian now, whether he wanted to be or not. Jacob Miller had come to New Prairie for a quiet life. He had wanted peace and solitude. Instead, he got 5 dragons and a problem that could start a war. He laughed quietly to himself in the darkness. He should have known better. Peace never lasted, not for him. But looking at the sleeping dragons, he realized he didn't regret his decision. Not yet, anyway. The first week was chaos. The dragons grew faster than Jacob thought possible. Each day they seemed bigger, hungrier, and more active. The red one, which Jacob started calling Ember because of her color, had definitely established herself as the leader. She organized the others and kept them from causing too much trouble. The blue dragon was calm and quiet. Jacob named him Frost. He spent most of his time watching the stars through the gaps in the barn roof. The black female was Shadow, and she lived up to her name. She could somehow blend into darkness so well that Jacob lost track of her constantly. The gray male became Storm because of the rumbling sounds he made when he was upset, and the little golden one was Spark because he was clearly the brightest of them all. Spark was special. Within 3 days of hatching, he started communicating with Jacob in a way that went beyond simple emotions. The little dragon could send actual thoughts, images, and ideas directly into Jacob's mind. It was disconcerting at first, but Jacob got used to it. Through Spark, he began to understand what all 5 dragons needed. The biggest problem was still food. Jacob had burned through his savings buying meat from suppliers in the colony's main settlement. He told them he was starting a breeding program for local predators, which was a terrible lie, but the best he could come up with. The suppliers didn't ask many questions as long as his money was good. But his neighbors started asking questions. Kate Hudson ran the ranch next to his, raising crops. She definitely noticed the strange sounds coming from his barn at night. One evening, Kate showed up at his door with a bottle of whiskey and a determined look on her face. Jacob knew that look. She wasn't leaving until she got answers. They sat on his porch, and Jacob tried to deflect her questions. He made excuses about starting a new project, about being busy, about needing privacy. Kate listened patiently, sipping her drink. Then she set down her glass and looked him straight in the eye. She told him she had seen lights in his barn 2 nights ago, lights that moved and flickered like fire. She told him she had heard roars that didn't sound like any animal native to New Prairie. She told him that whatever he was hiding, it was big, and he was going to need help eventually. She asked him to trust her. Jacob wanted to say no. He wanted to protect his secret, protect the dragons, protect Kate from getting involved in something dangerous. Tired of lying, tired of doing everything alone, tired of carrying the weight of this impossible situation by himself. He took Kate to the barn. When he opened the doors, 5 dragon heads turned to look and stood up to her full height, which was now almost 12 feet at the shoulder. Her scales gleamed in the lamplight. Shadow hissed from somewhere in the rafters. Storm moved protectively toward Jacob. Frost watched calmly, and Spark sent a curious mental probe toward the newcomer. Kate stood frozen for a full minute. Her face went pale, then flushed, then pale again. Jacob waited for her to scream, to run, to panic. Instead, she walked slowly into the barn, her eyes wide with wonder. She stopped a few feet from Ember and whispered one word: dragons. Ember sniffed Kate carefully, then made a sound that was almost approving. The other dragons relaxed. Spark sent Jacob a feeling of acceptance. Kate was okay. She could stay. Kate turned to Jacob with an expression that was equal parts terror and excitement. She asked how this happened, where they came from, and if he understood what this meant. Jacob told her everything: the eggs, the hatching, the bonding. He told her about the Draconith Empire, and why this was so dangerous. He told her he didn't know what to do. Kate was quiet for a long time. Then she started laughing. Not a happy laugh, but the kind of laugh that came from stress and disbelief. She sat down on a hay bale and put her head in her hands. When she looked up, she told Jacob he was either the luckiest or unluckiest man in the galaxy, and she hadn't decided which yet. But she also told him she would help. She had been a surveyor before becoming a farmer, and she knew how to keep secrets. She knew how to cover tracks. Together, they started working on a better system for keeping the dragons hidden and healthy. Kate helped Jacob convert the barn into a proper shelter. They installed better ventilation, created separate areas for each dragon's preferences, and set up a feeding schedule. Ember liked heat, so they gave her the warmest corner. Frost preferred the coolest spot near the ventilation fans. Shadow got the darkest area, full of places to hide. Storm claimed the space nearest the door, where he could guard the entrance. Spark didn't care where he slept, as long as it was near Jacob. The dragons continued to grow and develop. They were learning at an incredible rate. Within 2 weeks, all of them understood basic commands. It was sleek and dangerous looking, with markings that Jacob didn't recognize. The dragon sent a feeling of warning along with the image. Jacob understood. The Draconith were searching. They were looking for the missing eggs, and they were getting closer. Kate and Jacob started working on a contingency plan. They cleared an old cave system in the hills behind Jacob's property, a place where the dragons could hide if necessary. They stockpiled food and supplies. They prepared for the worst while hoping for the best. Meanwhile, the dragons were becoming more than just babies that needed care. They were becoming individuals with personalities and preferences. Ember was bossy and protective, always trying to keep her siblings in line. Frost was thoughtful and gentle, often sitting for hours just thinking about whatever dragons thought about. Shadow was playful and mischievous, constantly testing boundaries and trying to sneak outside. Storm was loyal and fierce, growling at anything that got too close to Jacob. And Spark was brilliant, soaking up knowledge like a sponge, and asking questions through mental impressions that Jacob struggled to answer. Jacob taught them about his world. He showed them the stars and told them about the galaxy. He explained about humans and other species. He tried to teach them about the Draconith, though he knew little himself. Spark absorbed it all, and shared what he learned with his siblings. One night, as Jacob was closing up the barn, Spark sent him the clearest mental message yet. It wasn't just an image or a feeling this time. It was a word, formed carefully in Jacob's mind. They needed him, trusted him, loved him, and he realized he felt the same way about them. But he also knew that this couldn't last forever. Somewhere up in the stars, the Draconith were searching, and when they found what they were looking for, everything would change. The patrol ship appeared on a Tuesday morning. Jacob was feeding the dragons when Spark sent him a sharp mental warning. Something was coming from the sky. Jacob looked up through the barn doors and saw the small military vessel descending toward his property. His heart sank into his stomach. Colonial patrol ships didn't just drop by for social visits. Someone had noticed something, and now they were coming to investigate. Jacob quickly ordered the dragons to... He failed at both. Barnes explained that their sensors had picked up unusual thermal signatures from Jacob's property. The readings didn't match anything that should be here. Not wildlife, not equipment, not anything normal. He was here to investigate, and he had the authority to search the premises if necessary. Jacob tried to stall. He offered coffee, tried to make small talk, suggested the sensors were malfunctioning. The protective gray dragon must have sensed Jacob's fear and stress. The dragon decided his guardian needed help. Before Jacob could stop him, Storm burst through the barn doors with a roar that shook the ground. The two Marines raised their weapons instantly. Barnes stumbled backward, his hand going to his sidearm. Storm stood in front of Jacob, wings spread wide, eyes blazing with protective fury. He was massive now, easily 20 feet long from nose to tail, with muscles rippling under his gray scales. He looked like he could tear apart a tank, and he probably could. Time seemed to freeze. Jacob stood there with a dragon between him and 3 armed soldiers. The Marines looked terrified. Barnes his weapons slowly. He told his Marines to do the same, his voice remarkably calm considering the circumstances. He looked at Jacob and asked a simple question. "Are those dragons? Real Draconith dragons?" Jacob nodded. There was no point in lying now. Barnes asked how long they had been here, and why Jacob hadn't reported them. Jacob explained everything. The eggs, the hatching, the bonding. He told Barnes that he couldn't let them be taken, that they were just babies, that they had chosen him as their guardian. Barnes listened carefully. He was quiet for a long moment, thinking. Then he did something Jacob didn't expect. He asked if he could approach the dragons. Jacob was surprised, but agreed. Barnes walked slowly toward Ember, keeping his hands visible and non-threatening. The red dragon watched him carefully, but didn't attack. Barnes looked at the 5 dragons, really looked at them. He saw how young they were despite their size. He saw how they positioned themselves around Jacob. He saw the intelligence in their eyes. Then he looked up at the sky and swore quietly. He told Jacob that there was a Draconith ship in orbit. It had been there for 3 days, scanning the planet. The colonial authorities knew about it, but didn't know what it was looking for. They were looking for these 5 dragons, and they were going to find them, eventually. Barnes pulled out his communicator and contacted his commanding officer, Captain Helen Wright. He gave her a quick briefing, and Jacob could hear the shock in her voice, even through the small speaker. She ordered Barnes to stay at the location, and told him she was coming personally. She also said she needed to inform the governor. Within 2 hours, Jacob's quiet ranch became the center of a crisis. Captain Wright arrived with a security team. Governor Patrick Lawson came by shuttle with his advisors. They brought scientists, diplomats, and military officers. Everyone wanted to see the dragons, and everyone had opinions about what should be done. The dragons didn't like the crowds. Storm growled constantly. Shadow vanished completely. Even Ember looked uncomfortable, with so many strangers around. Only Spark seemed curious, sending out gentle mental probes to the newcomers, and trying to understand what was happening. One of the people, a xenobiologist who had spent his career studying alien species. He was an older man with gray hair and excited eyes. When he saw the dragons, he actually gasped with joy. He approached them slowly, speaking in a soft voice, asking permission before coming closer. Spark responded to him. The little golden dragon sent a mental greeting that Cooper could somehow sense, if not fully understand. The scientist's eyes widened with wonder. He turned to Jacob and asked if the dragons were telepathic. Jacob confirmed it, and explained about Spark's special ability. Cooper spent an hour examining the dragons with their permission, taking readings and asking questions. Finally, he turned to the assembled officials with a serious expression. He told them that these dragons had bonded with Jacob, truly bonded. It was something that happened in Draconith culture, a sacred connection between dragon and guardian. He said that in all his research, he had never heard of it happening with another species. The governor asked what that meant practically. Cooper explained that if the dragons had truly chosen Jacob, then separating them could cause serious psychological harm to both the dragons and Jacob. More importantly, in Draconith culture, the bond was considered sacred. Violating it would be seen as a terrible crime. A woman named Lisa Morgan, the colony's chief diplomat, spoke up. She said that might be their only leverage. If the Draconith came demanding the dragons back, they could claim that the bond made it impossible to return them without violating the dragon's own cultural laws. It was a long shot, but it might work. Before they could discuss it further, Spark sent out a sharp mental warning that everyone with even slight telepathic sensitivity could feel. The Draconith ship was descending. They were coming now. The massive vessel appeared over the horizon, sleek and deadly. It was 10 times the size of any human ship present, covered in armor plating and weapons. His eyes, golden and fierce, settled on Governor Lawson. Zarkek spoke in a voice that rumbled like thunder. He demanded the return of the stolen eggs and the surrender of whoever had taken them. He said that this was an act of war, that humanity had violated the most sacred laws of his people. He gave them 1 hour to comply or face the consequences. The governor tried to explain, but Zarketh wasn't interested in explanations. He had been searching for weeks. He had tracked the eggs across light years. He had finally found them, and he wanted them back now. Nothing else mattered. That's when Jacob stepped forward. Everyone tried to stop him, but he shook them off. He walked toward the massive Draconith commander, unarmed and unafraid. Zarketh looked down at him with contempt. This small human thought he could negotiate? Jacob didn't try to negotiate. He simply told Zarketh the truth. He explained how he found the eggs, how the dragons hatched, how they bonded with him. He said he never stole anything, that he was just trying to protect the hatchlings. He asked only one thing: let the dragons decide for themselves. Zarketh was about to refuse when another Draconith stepped forward. She was smaller than the commander, with pale green scales and robes instead of armor. Her eyes were gentle but wise. She introduced herself as Sil-Ara, a sage and scholar of ancient traditions. She asked to see the hatchlings before any decisions were made. Zarketh looked like he wanted to refuse, but Sil-Ara gave him a look that suggested she outranked him in ways that had nothing to do with military authority. He agreed, grudgingly. Jacob led them to the barn. When Jacob opened the barn doors, the 5 dragons were waiting. They stood together in a defensive formation, with Ember at the front. They had grown even more in the past weeks. Ember was now the size of a small shuttle, her red scales gleaming in the sage asked questions, and Ember answered. Sometimes the other dragons joined in, their voices overlapping. Spark sent mental images to supplement what his siblings were saying. Jacob couldn't understand the words, but he could feed dragon and guardian. It hadn't happened with another species in over 1,000 years. The fact that it happened with a human was unprecedented, impossible even. But it had happened. The proof was standing right in front of her. 5 dragons who refused to leave their chosen guardian. A human who would face down a Draconith commander to protect them. The bond was real, and according to the oldest laws of their people, it was sacred. Zarketh heard this and growled in frustration. He said that sacred or not, the hatchlings were stolen property. They belonged to the Draconith Empire. They had to be returned. The law was clear on this matter. Silara agreed that the law was clear, but she pointed out that there were older laws, deeper laws. The Karnash superseded property rights. It superseded family claims. It even superseded the will of the Empire itself. Once a dragon chose a guardian, that choice was absolute. To break it would be to violate the most fundamental principles of their culture. Zarketh argued that this couldn't apply to a human. The Karnash was between dragons, not between species. Allowing it to stand would set a dangerous precedent. It would change everything about how they interacted with other races. Silara asked him if he was willing to violate sacred tradition because he was afraid of change. Her voice was gentle, but her words cut deep. Zarketh looked angry enough to breathe fire, but he held his tongue. Governor Lawson stepped forward carefully. He suggested that they test the bond. If it was truly as sacred as Silara claimed, then the dragons would choose Jacob over their own kind. She said if the bond was real, they would refuse. If it wasn't, they would obey. Jacob felt his throat tighten. He didn't want to say the words, but he understood why it was necessary. He looked at each dragon in turn. Ember, his fierce protector. Frost, his quiet thinker. Shadow, his playful spirit. Storm, his loyal guardian. Spark, his bright light. He told them they should go. He said their people were here, and they could go home now. He said they would be safe and cared for. He said it was okay to leave him. None of the dragons moved. Ember growled and pressed closer to Jacob. Storm wrapped his tail around Jacob's legs. Shadow materialized from the shadows and climbed onto his shoulders. Frost and Spark both sent waves of rejection through the mental link. The message was clear. This was home. Jacob was family. They were not leaving. Spark sent a thought so powerful that everyone in the barn felt it, even those without telepathic ability. It wasn't just a feeling or an image. It was a concept, complete and undeniable. Jacob was their guardian. This place was their home. Nothing would change that. Not commands, not tradition, not even their own species. Zarketh stood frozen, processing what he had just witnessed. His entire body language shifted from anger to something else. Confusion, maybe, or wonder. He had served in the military for decades, had fought in wars, had commanded fleets, but he had never seen anything like this. Silara smiled, a strange expression on a dragon's face. She told Zarketh that the evidence was clear. The Karnash was legitimate and complete. By the oldest laws of their people, these 5 dragons were bound to Jacob Miller, and he to them. To separate them would be a crime that would stain their honor forever. Dr. Cooper had been taking readings during the entire exchange. He spoke up now, his voice excited. He said the bond wasn't just emotional or cultural. It was biological. He could measure it. The dragon's brain patterns synchronized with Jacob's when they were close. Their heart rates matched. Their stress hormones balanced each other out. It was real in every measurable way. Commanders to uphold imperial law. But his culture's most sacred traditions demanded that he respect the Karnash. He couldn't do both. Silara told him there was a third option. Report everything to the Imperial Council and let them decide. Keep the hatchlings here under observation while awaiting judgment. It would take time, but it would be the correct procedure for such an unprecedented situation. Zarketh didn't like it, but he saw no better choice. He agreed to report to the council and request guidance. However, he said he would not leave the hatchlings unguarded. He would stay on New Prairie, and he would watch them personally. If any kind of manipulation or coercion, he would take them by force, regardless of the consequences. Governor Lawson quickly agreed to those terms. He offered to set up accommodations for the Draconith delegation and promised full cooperation. Zarketh accepted, but made it clear he was not happy about any of this. Silara asked if she could stay in the barn with the hatchlings for the night. She wanted to observe them, to understand the bond better. She promised she meant no harm. Jacob was nervous about agreeing, but Spark sent him a feeling of approval. The little dragon trusted her. That night was strange. Jacob sat in his barn, with 5 dragons and an ancient Draconith sage. Silara asked him questions about his life, his past, why he came to New Prairie. Jacob told her about the war, about wanting peace, about choosing a simple life. She listened without judgment. She asked about the day the eggs hatched. Jacob described it in detail, the fear he felt, the wonder, the moment when Ember first touched him, and he felt the bond form. Silara nodded as if this confirmed something she hatchlings must have sensed something in him, some quality that made him suitable as their guardian. She said it was a gift, but also a responsibility that would last his entire life. Jacob asked what would happen when the Imperial Council responded. Silara admitted she didn't know. The council was made up of old dragons who valued tradition, but they were also practical. The fact that this had happened at all would force them to reconsider many assumptions about humans and the Carnache itself. She also told him something that changed everything. The eggs hadn't been stolen randomly. They had been taken by a faction within the Draconith Empire who opposed the isolation policy. These extremists wanted to force a conflict with humanity to justify expanding their territory. But their plan had backfired spectacularly. Instead of creating an incident, they had created a bond. Jacob felt cold. Someone had deliberately put these dragons in danger to start a war. The thought made him angry in a way he hadn't felt in years. The dragons sensed his emotion, and they gathered around him protectively. Silara assured him that the extremists would be dealt with. What mattered now was protecting the hatchlings and preserving the bond. She believed the council would rule in favor of the Carnache, but it would take time and careful diplomacy. As dawn approached, Jacob realized his life would never be simple again. The Imperial Council's response took 3 months to arrive. During that time, Jacob's ranch transformed into something he never could have imagined. The colonial government built a special habitat near his barn for Silara and the other Draconith observers. Scientists set up research stations to study the bond. Diplomats came and went constantly, trying to navigate the delicate situation. Kate became Jacob's official partner in what everyone now called the Dragon Ranch. She handled the logistics, the supply orders, the endless paperwork that came with housing 5 rapidly growing dragons. She was good at it, better than Jacob ever could be. She also became friends with Silara, and the two of them spent hours discussing dragon culture and human farming techniques. The dragons continued to grow and develop. Ember was now large enough to fly, though she still practiced mostly at night when fewer people were watching. She had a natural talent for leadership, organizing her siblings and setting boundaries. Even the adult Draconith observers respected her, which said something about her presence. Frost developed an unexpected interest in mathematics and engineering. Dr. Cooper discovered this when he found the blue dragon rearranging equipment in the research station according to some complex pattern. When Cooper questioned him, Frost used Spark as a translator to explain a theory about energy distribution. The scientist was amazed. He started bringing Frost problems to solve, and the dragon tackled them with enthusiasm. Shadow became the ranch's unofficial scout. She loved to explore the surrounding territory, using her camouflage ability to move unseen. She mapped every cave, every hill, every water source within 50 miles. Jacob worried about her wandering, but Commander Zarketh grudgingly admitted that her skills were impressive. He had been a scout himself in his younger days. Storm appointed himself as Jacob's personal guard. The gray dragon went everywhere with him, watching for threats. When colonial militia came to train near the ranch, Storm asked to join them. The soldiers were nervous at first, but Storm proved to be an excellent student. He learned human combat tactics while teaching them about Draconith fighting styles. A mutual respect developed. And Spark continued to be extraordinary. His telepathic abilities grew stronger every day. He could now communicate clearly with anyone who had even slight mental sensitivity. He started learning human languages by reading people's thoughts, which was both helpful and slightly disturbing. Dr. Cooper said Spark might be the key to true understanding between species. Zarketh remained on New Prairie, watching everything with critical eyes. He was still not happy about the situation, but something had shifted in him. He saw how the dragons thrived under Jacob's care. He saw the genuine bond between them. It challenged everything he thought he knew about humans and the Karnash. One evening, Zarketh actually spoke to Jacob directly, not about the dragons or the bond, but about war. They were both soldiers who had chosen peace. They understood each other in that way. Zarketh admitted that he had expected to find the hatchlings neglected or abused. Instead, he found them happy and healthy. It confused him, but he was starting to accept it. When the Imperial Council's message finally arrived, everyone gathered in the barn. It was fitting that the judgment would be delivered in the place where it all began. Silara received the communication and read it aloud, translating it into human language. The council had debated for weeks. They consulted the oldest records, spoke with the wisest sages, and argued every possible interpretation of their laws. In the end, they made a decision that would change the relationship between humans and Draconith forever. They ruled that the Karnash was legitimate and must be honored. Jacob Miller was officially recognized as the guardian of the 5 dragons. The bond was sacred and could not be broken. Any attempt to separate them would be considered a crime against the highest traditions of the Draconith Empire. But the council went further than that. They proposed something unprecedented. They wanted to establish a cultural exchange program. Young Draconith could study on human worlds, learning about their culture and ways. Humans could visit Draconith planets, though under strict supervision at first. Jacob's ranch would serve as the first embassy of sorts, a neutral ground where both species could interact and learn from each other. The council also demanded accountability. The extremist faction that had stolen the eggs would face justice. Their plan to start a war had failed, and they would be punished according to Draconith law. The council made it clear that such actions would not be tolerated. Governor Lawson immediately accepted the council's terms. He saw the opportunity this represented. For 70 years, humans and Draconith had avoided each other. Now they had a chance to build something better. He pledged full support for the cultural exchange program and promised to make New Prairie a model of cooperation. Jacob listened to all of this with mixed feelings. He was relieved that the dragons could stay with him. He was glad that war had been avoided. But he was also overwhelmed. He had just wanted a quiet life on his ranch. Now he was at the center of galactic history, a bridge between 2 species that had once been enemies. Spark sensed his conflicted emotions and sent a gentle wave of reassurance. The little dragon reminded him that he didn't have to do this alone. He had the dragons, he had Kate, he had friends among both humans and Draconith now. Together, they could handle whatever came next. The following months brought more changes. The Draconith built a permanent embassy near Jacob's ranch. The first cultural exchange students arrived, young dragons and humans eager to learn from each other. Dr. Cooper and Solara published papers on the Carnash that revolutionized understanding of bonding and telepathy. The colonial government invested in infrastructure, turning the remote frontier settlement into a hub of interspecies cooperation. Kate expanded her farm and started teaching Draconith about human agriculture. She discovered they had techniques that could benefit both species. She became something of a celebrity, the human who could discuss crop rotation with ancient dragon farmers and make them laugh with her dry humor. Zarketh received a promotion. The council recognized his handling of the crisis and appointed him as the first official ambassador to humanity. He accepted reluctantly, but he was the right choice. He understood both the importance of tradition and the necessity of change. He and Governor Lawson worked together to establish protocols for cooperation. The 5 dragons continued to grow and mature. They were teenagers now in dragon terms, full of energy and curiosity. Ember showed leadership qualities that impressed even the most skeptical Draconith elders. Frost's mathematical abilities led to collaborations with human engineers on new technologies. Shadow's scouting skills made her valuable for exploration missions. Storm became a bridge between human and Draconith military forces, teaching both sides to respect each other. And Spark's telepathic gifts made him an invaluable translator and mediator. Jacob adapted to his new role, though he never quite got comfortable with the attention. He still woke before dawn. He still did his chores. He still preferred the company of his dragons to diplomatic functions. But he understood the importance of what was happening. He attended the ceremonies, gave the speeches when asked, and tried to set a good example. 1 year after the eggs first appeared in his pasture, there was a celebration. Representatives from both species gathered at the ranch to commemorate what they were calling the Day of Bonding. There were speeches and gifts and elaborate displays. Jacob endured it all with good humor, though he was relieved when it was finally over. That night, he sat in his barn with the 5 dragons, just like he had done so many times before. They were massive now, each one capable of incredible feats. Ember could breathe fire hot enough to melt metal. Frost could create ice from moisture in the air. Shadow could become completely invisible. Storm could call lightning from clear skies. Spark could communicate across vast distances telepathically. But they were still his dragons. They still curled up around him for comfort. They still looked to him for guidance. They still considered this barn their home and Jacob their family. Solara joined them that evening. She had become a permanent fixture at the ranch, recording everything for the historical archives. She told Jacob that what he had accomplished was remarkable. He had bridged a gap that had existed for generations. He had proven that different species could not only coexist, but thrive together. Jacob disagreed. He said he hadn't accomplished anything special. He had just done what anyone would do when they found creatures in need. He had given them shelter, food, and care. The dragons had done the rest. They were the ones who chose to bridge the gap. They were the ones who made peace possible. Spark sent a mental correction. It wasn't just Jacob's actions that mattered. It was his heart. The dragons had sensed in him something rare. Compassion without expectation. Protection without ownership. Love without conditions. That's why the Carnash formed. That's why it endured. Kate arrived with coffee and joined them in the barn. She teased Jacob about becoming a celebrity, a hero to both species. Jacob grumbled and said he was just a farmer who happened to find some eggs. Kate laughed and said that was exactly why it worked. He had never wanted glory or recognition. He had just wanted to do the right thing. As they sat together, human, dragon, and Draconith sage, Watching the stars through the barn roof, Jacob realized something. His quiet life hadn't been destroyed. It had been transformed. He still had his ranch, his peace, his solitude when he wanted it. But he also had family, purpose, and a future he never could have imagined. The frontier world of New Prairie had become the center of something greater than anyone expected. A place where two species learned to trust each other. A place where old enemies became new friends. A place where 5 dragon eggs changed the course of galactic history. And it all started because a quiet human farmer chose kindness over fear, protection over safety, and love over isolation. Jacob Miller never wanted to be special, but in the end, that's exactly what made him the perfect choice for the dragons who needed him most.